Welcome everyone to our webinar today, Evidence-Based Literacy Practices for Adult Educators. This webinar is hosted through the Florida Literacy Coalition and made possible through the support of the Florida Department of Education, Division of Career and Adult Education. So with that, I would like to introduce you to our presenters today, Kevin Smith and Lori Lee. So Kevin is currently the Alliance Manager of the Florida Career Readiness Research Alliance at the Regional Educational Library Southeast at Florida State University. He is also the task lead for training, coaching, and technical support activities. Lori is currently the Improving Literacy Research Alliance Manager for the Regional Educational Library Southeast. Both Kevin and Lori have presented throughout the state, including the Florida Literacy Conference, and we're pleased to have them here with us today. So Kevin?
Hi, thanks so much, Nicole. Lori and I are going to wave hello, and then we're going to turn our cameras off and just go ahead and jump right into the content. And we just want to take a few moments to thank you all for being here this afternoon with us. And I appreciate Nicole for the warm welcome, and we certainly appreciate the opportunity to share with you. So I'll turn it over to Lori for a brief introduction as well.
Yes, good afternoon. We are really glad that you're with us today. Thank you for joining us on this Friday. And we're excited to share with you this afternoon and look forward to hearing from you throughout our time together as well. So welcome.
Thanks, Lori. So the first thing I'll briefly start with, we have a disclaimer slide because our work is through contract with the United States Department of Education, the Institute of Education Sciences, and they fund our work. And as Nicole mentioned, I am the Alliance Manager for the Florida Career Readiness Research Alliance, which focuses both on career and technical education and adult education. What the disclaimer notes is that while we may share best practice and evidence-based practices with you, you're not required to do these things. We're just here to share what we know from the research and to share with you practices that may be beneficial for you. But again, it's up to you at the state and local level in terms of what you actually move forward with.
Okay, so a little bit about our goals this afternoon during our time together. The first thing that we'd like to do is just share a little bit with you regarding the Regional Educational Laboratory Southeast and what it is that we do. So we'll spend a little bit of time doing that. And then we'll review with you the self-study guide for evidence-based practices in adult literacy education. And so we'll walk through that with you and share a little bit about that this afternoon. And then thirdly, we'll become more familiar with the conclusions that can be drawn from the research on which the guide was based. And so we'll delve into that a little bit. And then we'll have some discussions via Zoom and through the chat as we think about planning, reviewing, incorporating perhaps some of these evidence-based practices in your programs and what that might look like. And we want to get some tips from you in regard to what some of these things already look like in your programs. And points 2, 3, and 4 won't necessarily be linear. We're going to move through the self-study guide, and as we do so, we'll be looking at those conclusions and we'll have those discussions along the way. So we're excited to be here and look forward to our afternoon together. So a little bit about the REL Southeast. You see here on the map, color-coded, there are 10 regional educational laboratories throughout the country. And so the labs serve the entire nation and some islands that are far flung from us as well. And so you see, and rightfully in the gold color in the Southeast, since we are located at Florida State University, you can see that we serve North and South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida. And our work just involves supporting all the educational initiatives, including those that are related to literacy, in this case, adult education, career and technical education, those kinds of initiatives that are important to our states. And so we work to support those. And really the main mission of AREL is to bridge that gap from research to practice. And so we want researchers to be researching those kinds of things that are valuable in the field. And then we want practitioners to have access to that research, to know that what they're doing in their programs is really research-based and evidence-based, and they can be sure that they have the best chance possible for success.
Perfect. Thanks, Lori. So a quick introduction. What we're going to talk today about is a guide that we have to share with you. And this guide came out of some trainings that we did both on literacy strategies and literacy practices that have a basis in the evidence that are research supports. So we started out doing a set of regional trainings around the state. And as Nicole mentioned, we did one of those trainings at the Florida Literacy Coalition conference, I think about 2 years ago. And from all those trainings that we did, we pieced together the research-based practices that we found and love discussing those with folks across the state. And we created a guide to help districts, corrections programs, and colleges think about what areas might be important to consider and implement in terms of evidence-based practices in adult literacy education. So through that work, we piloted the guide again, going out across the state regionally, working with adult educators and listening to their stories and how adult literacy education works, and used all of those thoughts like focus groups to inform revisions to the guide. So eventually we came up with a final draft and submitted that to the Institute of Education Sciences, and it was published and came out in May. And again, we've done a couple of trainings with the guide. We've been super excited about it, had good feedback so far. And really, even through the piloting, we're able to see folks make some positive changes to their program based on conversations they had. So I'll leave it at that for now, and we'll talk more about it, and you'll see how the guide works as we go through this.
So a little bit about the purpose and use of the self-study guide. We've developed self-study guides in the past for a variety of different areas. And oftentimes they work well when there's some kind of program that needs to be reflected upon. And as we think about what's working well and what might need improvement. And so we had somewhat of a framework as we began really assimilating the guide. But the first step is really for programs to collect information or evidence regarding particular areas that the guide is going to look at that's evidence-based. And this will make more sense in a little bit. And so evidence is gathered and questions are asked that are reflective in nature, and a team is assembled. And initially, the team works through the self-study guide on their own and really thinks about that evidence that they might have, those questions that are reflective, and comes up with a rating for each one of those areas. And you'll see that as we work through this afternoon. So it's really initially collecting that information regarding implementation as it exists presently. So it is really kind of establishes a baseline. So what does our program look like when we consider these specific areas? And then after we have a good sense of what our program entails, what it looks like in a variety of areas, then we can really think about which areas we're really doing well, which areas that are okay, but we can think of some things that we can do better, and then which areas that really do need some work and that we need to prioritize for improvement. And so an implementation plan is then developed. And so what are those steps that we can take in order to improve those particular areas? And who needs to be involved? And on our calendars, how quickly or how much time is this going to take in order for us to do this well? And so it's really prioritizing those needs, and then thinking about a plan to meet those needs and overcome any obstacles that might be in the way of accomplishing those goals. And then as that plan is implemented, as we've established our priorities, and then we move forward with those next steps, then we begin to collect some data on what's happening. And so are we implementing as we intended to implement? Are those steps being taken in a quality kind of way? Is there something else that we need to do or tweak along the way? And so it's a type of progress monitoring. So we engage in that continuing program improvement kind of process. And then finally, perhaps at the end of the school year, we come back to that and evaluate what we've done and really think about, okay, so we've addressed this particular need. Do we feel that it's in a place where now we need to move on to something else and work on something else and take steps to improve another area? Or does this take more time? Are we going to need to spend some more time in this particular area? So it's very a reflective process, but it's more than reflection. It's really planning for those action steps, implementing those steps, and then coming back and ensuring that those steps have been taken and that they've been successful.
Thanks so much, Lori, for walking us through the purpose and use of the guide. So what I want you to do, I'm going to talk a little bit about the self-study process. We've mentioned it's a process. We have other guides that are similar. This one, of course, focuses on adult literacy education. What we'd like for you all to do in the chat, I've already mentioned we have several different program types that focus on adult education. So what we'd like to know in the chat is if your program focuses on, or your class, if you're a teacher. Again, I'm sure we have all different groups out there. Since we can't see you, we'd like to know if you could put in the chat your role. So are you teacher, administrator, counselor, program director? We'd love to know what your role is if you don't mind sharing that in the chat. Then what specific group you serve. Do you serve everyone? Are you focused on corrections? Are you focused on English for speakers of other languages? So specifically, is there a particular focus that you would have? So if you want to complete that in the chat, we'd love to learn more about you and what you do, and it will help us as we're going through the process to know exactly what would be most beneficial in terms of what direction to share. So while you're going through the chat, and thanks for those who've already done those, Yasmin and Pamela and Suzanne, we really appreciate you going through, and Dina, letting us know. As you're completing that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the process. So the important part of going through a self-study is the fact that it's said, as Lori mentioned, to promote reflection. And the really important part of that is that it takes everyone's perspective. So in terms of going through a self-study, it's helpful to have teachers as part of this process, counselors, administrators, really everyone who plays a role, because you all have different perspectives. You all have different thoughts about what works well and how things are working. So it is important when you're creating a self-study team to think about exactly who all is part of that. And of course, you need a facilitator, whether that's a teacher or an administrator or a counselor. We can't say for sure who would be the best facilitator, but it certainly would be someone who knows at least a little bit about the guide and how to present it, as we're doing briefly this afternoon, and could help lead a conversation on self-evaluating how things are going within your class or within your program. So you'll see, again, the folks who recommended to be part of this process are advisors, program-based administrators, teachers, and anyone else who's part of the adult education program that you have. Because again, you'll all have valuable perspectives in terms of what would be most beneficial and how things are working. Because sometimes you may know how things are working from a teacher perspective or from a counselor perspective, but you may not know how everything's working because everyone doesn't serve in all of those roles at the same time typically, right? And I really appreciate you all sharing. We have a number of folks who have told us, and it looks like we've got a mix of just about everything, Lori. So it's good to see
We
that.
do. I see everything from corrections to ABE to volunteer tutors and libraries, lots of different roles represented for sure.
That's wonderful. Well, keep completing that. We're so glad to hear from you. We're going to ask you some questions that we'd love to see on chat as we move through this process too, because what we want you to do is, from your perspective, really think about what this looks like and how well it's working for you, regardless of what your role is. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to talk about scoring guide area 1. So within the self-study guides, we have different areas that are aligned with the research. And Lori and I are going to briefly talk about each of these areas and ask you questions about how you feel about your progress within this and how you think things are going overall. And I'll talk about the rating scale in a minute. So area 1 is development and use of student data profiles. And we know, and again, we tried to provide some evidence for you from research. And if you're not familiar with the citation that's at the bottom here, it is one of the strongest documents that have come out, the strongest research reports in adult education literacy that I'm aware of at all. And we created a whole guide based on it. So Creedner, MacArthur, and Wrigley Adult Education Literacy Instruction, a review of the research. It's a fantastic compilation of much of the research that had been conducted in adult education literacy programs for the past 20 or 25 years. It came out in 2010. We have some updated documents in the guide as well, but that really is a treasure trove of information about research in adult education literacy instruction. So if you're not familiar with that, it's a great document. And again, it's publicly available online. The title is there and the author's names. So we know that it's really important to assess a student's reading ability in adult education literacy. It's really important to place them in instruction that matches their needs. It's really critical that you have assessments that provide information that's instructionally relevant so that you get information from screening and from assessments early on in the process that will tell you exactly what level you need to work at with the student. And I actually saw one of the questions that came up that said, where are we in terms of our ESOL program? What level are you working with? And I've already seen someone respond multi-level, so everything. So it's important, and you already understand. And so that even question aligns with the fact that we know we need to place students at an appropriate level. So it's really important at intake, or even before that, going back and looking at the data that you have for these students, that you know where they are and that you create a student data profile. And it's not just at intake. You also need to continue to look at data that you have as a teacher, both official data like your test scores, as well as unofficial data like classroom assessment scores, reading progress monitoring tools that you're using in class to see exactly how your students are progressing. And for adults in particular, it's important to let them know how they're progressing. Share progress, celebrate progress with them, and let them know if they're not making progress. It's really important, again, to keep a profile to let them know how they're doing in terms of instruction. So looking at the two parts, so for the scoring guide area, we have part 1.1, meaning there's a data collection process beginning at intake that's in place to collect and share data on student assessment and planning for proper program and instructional placement. Note it says beginning at student intake. And Lori and I have done this, a session like this with multiple folks. Sometimes the data gets collected at intake and doesn't make it to the teacher. It's really important that everyone's on the same page. You could have a great data collection process, but if it doesn't make it to the teacher to inform their instruction, then it certainly wouldn't be as helpful as it would otherwise, right? And then the second part of this, teachers and programs are able to track student progress through the use of valid and reliable assessments. So thinking about what assessments you use to track progress and share that with students. So what we'd like you to do in the chat at this point, we have what's called a 4-point rating scale for this. And I'd like you to think about this. And if you'd like, and again, it's up to you, and there's nothing, we're not evaluating you. There's nothing we're going to save or report to anyone. We're just interested to see what your feelings are, because help us know where to kind of discuss the last part of this. So our 4-point rating scale, 4 means that you're perfect in this area. You can't even think of anything to improve. You have a great way to collect data. It gets to the teacher. Teachers are able to progress monitor, and they're able to show students exactly how they're showing growth. So if you're at a 4, it's perfect. You can't think of any way to improve it. If you're at a 3, you're doing pretty well there. These pieces are in place. They're not bad, but you could do a little bit better. There are places you could tweak and improve. If you're at a 2, that's an area that you want to focus in. Yes, it's there, but it's not where we want it to be. We really should make improvement there. We know that that's an area of focus that we want to really think about as a team. How could we improve this process? And a 1 means really, we know that it's important to do this. We got bigger fish to fry. We really can't focus on this right now. Again, we know it's important, but there are too many other things we need to do. So if you could, in the chat, if you wouldn't mind taking a moment and letting us know, where do you think you are? And we have people, looks like, and we really appreciate you doing this. You're all over the place. We go from some folks are at a 4, some folks are at a 1.5 or a 2. It looks like in general, what are you seeing, Lori, around a 2, 2.5 looks about average?
I see 2s and lots of 2.5s reflected for sure. People don't want to land on a 3 or a 2, apparently.
Boy, it's so funny. A 0.5 is not supposed to be a thing, but we have found that educators make it a thing.
Yes, they do indeed.
So that's scoring guide area 1. It sounds like a lot of you want to focus on that. And when we get toward the end, We'll talk about which of these areas you want to prioritize, which ones you want to focus on, and we'll strategize ways that you might be able to improve. So it'll help us getting a very informal, very non-binding vote on how you're doing. It'll help our process at the end of this to know what types of things might be most helpful to share and discuss. And thanks for Lori for keeping an eye on the chat. I'm going to pass the baton, and Lori's going to talk about the next scoring guide area.
Okay,
No,
so
actually, I'm going to talk about the next one. I'm sorry.
go ahead.
I'm sorry. Lori's going to pick up on when we get to 3. This one is mine as well. So the second one is instructional methods and materials. So we know that what you use in terms of instruction, the curricula, the approaches, and right now, I doubt anyone's at a 4 for their approach because everyone's had to adjust significantly, or most people at least have had to significantly adjust their instructional model since the spring. So there may be no one at a 4 for this. But scoring guide area 2 focus on instructional approaches, curriculum, materials, tools, and assessments of learners consistent with the research. So how do you know if what you're doing is evidence-based? How do you, if you know if the approach that you're taking works best for your students and for adults in general? It should be aligned, of course, with research, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about too. And then knowledge of sound assessment practices. And again, this is from another wonderful research report, Improving Adult Literacy Options for Practice and Research by Les Gold and Welsh Ross, that came out in 2012. Again, another really strong research report on how to improve adult literacy programs. So that in general, it's just, how do you know? What kind of rubric do you use to determine what platform you're using for instruction, the curriculum that you're using, the methods that you're using to teach, whether, mixing up instruction, doing some lecture like we're doing now, but also having small group, one-on-one practice time. So how do you make those decisions? What's your decision-making process for ensuring that your instructional methods and materials are the best they can be for your students? So this also breaks down into 2 parts. 2.1, you have a plan in place to use a rubric or some criteria for selecting those interventions and curricula that have been shown to have a positive effect on student achievement. So you've actually looked, and if you're buying something or you're talking to a vendor, you're talking to a consultant who's coming in and sharing practices with you, you ask them questions like, which kind of students did this work for? What kind of sample size? How did you study this? Was it a randomized placement? Was it a large group spread across states? Was it a very small group? Did the students that this study focused on for the intervention that you did they look like mine? So having some kind of rubric or criteria where you're asking good questions about why you select the criteria for the curriculum and interventions that you use for your students. And then the second part of this, there's a plan in place that reflects instructional practice that have been shown to increase student achievement. And again, I've already said that I know we're in a strange place right now with instruction. There's a lot of hybrid instruction and online and a lot of shifting quickly to online. So I just want you to think about all of that as you score this area. Think about how you're doing. So do you have a good place do you have a good process in place to select your instructional materials and methods and your platform for instruction, whatever that may be? So take a moment. Again, I'll relay the rating scale. So a 4 means that you're doing perfectly. You can't think of any way to do better. A 3 means we're doing pretty well here. We're okay. We're not perfect. We could make some tweaks, but we're doing pretty well. A 2 in this area means that we really are doing this, but it needs to improve. We have some area for improvement. And a 1 means we know this is important. We got bigger fish to fry. We just can't focus on this right now. So again, if you could go through the chat and just let us know where do you think you are with this one. And thanks, Marissa, for kind of putting a break in there for us for this particular one. That's helpful.
Yeah, I'm seeing.
Okay, so what are we looking for?
I'm seeing a few more 3s.
Good.
Some 2s certainly, but a few more 3s on this one.
I like a 2.2. That is very specific. Thanks, Lori. Good. So it's a mix. So Yeah, it sounds like you're a little bit higher maybe than the 2 to 2.5 we had last time, maybe somewhere between 2.5 and 3. It looks like most of you feel that there are improvements that could be made. And I know some of that's a quick shift to online instruction, but just think about, again, what rubrics used, and it takes a team. And I know different people would be part of those decision-making processes, right? So making sure that your program or your class or whatever level you're at, that you have a conversation. There is a process in place that you can describe. Okay, so it's again a little bit of everything here. Thank you so much. So that's the first two areas, and I'm going to now officially and correctly pass the baton to Lori, who's going to talk about area 4. Excuse me, area 3.
All right. So moving on to area 3, we consider time, and it seems like time can be our friend, or oftentimes time is our enemy because we just never have enough of it, right? That seems to be the most common complaint when we think about time. And so don't get too ahead of me now, because I'm going to ask you to put a little something different in the chat before you actually rate yourself. But when we think about time, we think about, first of all, is there enough time for adults to be in the program that they can actually improve their skills? So does the program provide sufficient time for them to actually make gains, to make progress? So does your program provide that time? And then secondly, the aspect is in regard to actually scheduling. And so, and you can see there the research, and this is the same study that Kevin looked at just a moment ago, is that sometimes that is the pace of instruction when we talk about time, or adults may drop out because they can't get there. The schedule isn't conducive to their work schedule or their home life, so it's not in a convenient place. And so when we think about time, we're thinking about it in a dual kind of way. So is there enough time provided by the program to actually learn? And then are the programs scheduled such that adult learners can actually attend? And so are they flexible? Are they fixed? Are they traditional? Is there open enrollment? And so I want you to think about that. And then in the chat, I'd like for you just in a few words, put just a couple of notes about your schedule. Do you have open enrollment? Do you have flexible schedules? Do you have closed schedules? Do you meet on evenings or during the day? Just real quickly, just in a few words, share something about your schedules or your time. 2 or 3 words. We have flexible schedules. Okay, daytime multi-level classes. Thank you, Catherine. That's good to know. We'll wait there we go. Evening fixed schedules, morning, afternoon, evening, 6 days a week. That's pretty incredible. Some flexible scheduling going on. So as you continue to type in the chat, flexible for both of us, usually early evening. So it looks like you really are working to meet the needs of your adult learners. And so I'll go on and talk just a little bit as you complete putting just a little bit of information about your schedules in the chat there. And so this, although we're talking about time in a couple different ways, there's just one part to this, and that is the school has established a schedule that will provide the appropriate frequency, consistency, and duration of instruction to meet adult learners' needs. So this is really incorporating the amount of instruction that's provided, and then how it's provided, that flexible scheduling or that opportunity that exists for our adult learners to actually attend and actually participate in instruction. Okay, so now you can actually go back. Okay, and I'm looking at, thank you, Sandy, volunteer tutors and their students decide on how many hours to meet each week. So that's very flexible. So they actually decide upon the time and the amount of time. Okay, so now I'd like for you to rate this area. How do you think you're doing with this in regard to scheduling and the amount of instructional time that is provided? Okay.
Thanks. And I've seen a couple of points that they're making too, Lori, like someone mentioned corrections there, 3 hours Monday to Friday. and that for some students that's a really long time, that's too long maybe.
Mhm.
And that they're having some issues with persistence and retention with students, uh, because, well, there are many different reasons, we know that, but they have challenges sometimes. But I was impressed with the level of flexible scheduling that many of them shared. um,
Absolutely.
One thing I'll mention, and I did another session this morning with another group on retention and persistence strategies, in another research study, and I want to think it's actually referenced in this self-study guide at the end. Students need, at least adult education students need on average about 100 to 150 hours of instruction to make 1 year level gain in literacy. So think about your schedule, and I know some of you mentioned, the different types of schedules you have. You might not be able to approach that within a year. And I know you have to be flexible just to meet students' needs, but it takes in adult education about 100 to 150 hours from several different research studies to show an annual year's literacy gain. So that's just something to consider.
Mhm. And that's an excellent point. And that's information we need to have, right? So if we don't know how long it actually takes for an average adult to make a learning gain when it comes to literacy, then we can't provide the adequate amount of instruction, except if it's by accident. So we can't be intentional about it. So we have information now. And so that's something that we can choose to address if that's something that our program is not providing. We don't have enough instructional time because now we know that we need that 100 to 150 hours. Okay.
Thanks. And I think from looking over this, we have probably, again, between a 2 and a 3. It's a fairly even split, probably between 2 and 3 on this one.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you for participating. We appreciate your interaction via Zoom. So we'll move on to the next area now, area 4, and this has to do with teacher preparation and training. And we've been to a number of adult education trainings and events. And Kevin and I are relatively new to this world. It's only been in the last 2 or 3 years that we've become acquainted with many of you. And I tell you, we've really enjoyed it. And we've enjoyed it because you are so passionate about what you do and because you influence and affect the lives of families. And we both have personal connections to adult education. Both of our mothers got their GEDs after they married very young. And so we have that connection to you all. But what we found as we visited with many of you is the fact that there's really no front door to becoming an adult educator. That many teachers and many of you, we like to say that you came in sideways. Because there wasn't a front door. And so you may have come in through the K-12 world. You may have come in another door, but there's not very many, in fact, very few education programs in the United States that are dedicated to producing teachers of adults. So we have education programs that are designed to produce teachers of children and teenagers, but not too many that are designed to train someone to teach adults. And so you come in through a different pathway. And that neither wrong nor right. That's just the fact of it. And so because of that, we need to make sure that our teachers in the classroom are well trained. And we know that even if you are a successful teacher of children in the K-12 world, there are special skills that are needed to teach adults. And so we have to make sure that our teachers have those skills, that they walk in the classroom and there are adults in front of them, that they have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to teach those adults that are there. And so teacher preparation and training is extremely important. We're very blessed in our state to have IP Day, and many of you have taken advantage of the resources that are provided by IP Day. And we have a wonderful relationship with June Rawl and the folks there. They do a great job of archiving webinars and providing all kinds of different resources for professional development. But you can see on your screen that research tells us that it's really important that our adult literacy teachers are trained, that they're prepared for what they do. And not only a one-time training, a preparation for entering the classroom, but also that continued training, that they receive that ongoing professional development. And here we see as well, and this is a challenge in a lot of our programs, that really the best practice is hiring experienced full-time teachers. And we know that that's not necessarily possible in many of our programs, that many of our programs employ K-12 teachers in the evening to teach adults, and that there are not predominantly full-time teachers in programs. Not to say that y'all aren't out there, you are, but in many cases, many programs use more part-time people. And so in recognizing that, so if that's the case, then again, we have to make sure that we are really making the effort to train our teachers well and provide that ongoing professional development and support. And I think provide a means for those teachers, especially our part-time teachers, to access that. Because many times there may be professional development that's available to our full-time teachers during the day or during a time where they are technically at work. But for our part-time teachers, they may not be available during those times. And so they need some means to access that professional development. So that's something to keep in mind. And so there's two parts to this area as well. And the first one is to identify, hire, and retain those faculty that we find to be excellent at teaching adults. So we need to make sure that we're recruiting people that are high quality educators that have the skills and abilities to teach our adult educators, our adult learners. And so that's step number one, is to ensure that we hire the right people and that we work to retain them. I'm sorry?
I want to share one quick thing that I noticed, especially on retention, because we don't talk a lot about that.
Go right ahead.
When Lori and I worked again with folks regionally around the state, one thing we heard over and over again in terms of retention was it being like a family environment for the teachers, that everyone looked out for each other and they supported each other. And that's really important to foster that collaborative and family-like environment among adult educators. That's really important. And it's hard to tease that out sometimes, but I'm sure Lori will confirm that we heard that over and over again when programs felt they were doing well on retention in particular, that they really were like a family and had known each other and treated each other well. Does that sound right, Lori?
Oh, absolutely. I'm so glad you said that, because it were those programs that had high retention rates for their teachers. Absolutely. And that's exactly what they said, you know, that I feel welcome here, that we look out for one another, we help each other, all those kinds of things that would encourage someone to stay in that position. And those teachers, they were teaching all day long someplace else. And then they were coming to this job in the evening and teaching 3 more hours at night. And so you don't do that if you're not happy. So Kevin's exactly right. We heard that over and over again, that little families had developed, absolutely. So that hiring and training and retaining well is really important. And then that second aspect, making sure that there is a plan and that it doesn't happen haphazardly and it doesn't happen unintentionally, but professional development and ongoing support is provided to full-time teachers and to part-time teachers in particular. And those part-time teachers, oftentimes programs are going to have to make that extra effort to make sure that the professional development is provided in a way that's accessible to our part-time people. And I see yes, yes, yes from Mercedes. So thank you for that. So thinking about that aspect of, you know, those two aspects of teacher preparation and training, go ahead now and rate yourselves. Where do you think you are in regard to that?
And as they're rating themselves, I mean, Florida's lucky in terms of the Department of Education. They really support As Nicole mentioned at the front of this, the Florida Literacy Coalition, and allow folks like Lori and I to share with you and to bring you together through webinars. Also, as she mentioned, IPDA and ACE of Florida. So we have a couple of different organizations who are able to provide professional development to adult educators, which is phenomenal. And we really appreciate you all taking time out of your crazy days. And some of you probably are those ones who are teaching all day and maybe doing additional hours after school too, and still finding time for PD. So as you're rating yourself, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks to the state of Florida for having multiple different groups to provide these options.
Yes, absolutely. So the support that our adult educators get in Florida is pretty phenomenal. And I'd like to echo Kevin's thanks to you all for all the work that you do and for taking time out of your day today. Okay, I see they're a strictly volunteer-based organization for their tutors. It's really a labor of love and dedication. And we found that a lot as well. And that as we worked our way around the state, that, you know, again, people don't teach all day and then teach half the night for the money necessarily. You know, that family atmosphere and the fact that it's rewarding and that it is a labor of love. So thank you for that. Thank you that you're dedicated to the adult learners in our state. We appreciate it. So
Good.
3s and 2s again, I see.
And there are a couple of folks who have volunteer-based programs. So, but so even there, think about how do you train your volunteers when they come in? You know, there should be a process in place to make sure that, you know that the training that's received for the instructors and tutors. So yeah, I already see you do provide a focus on training support and continuing in ed, even for the tutors and volunteers. That's excellent. All right, well, thank you. And thanks, Lori, for talking about a couple of really important areas for consideration. So we're going to talk next about, we have 2 areas left. We're going to talk about communication. So research notes the importance of communication and community building. And this goes into the piece that Lori and I just shared about retention, to ensure that students receive assistance in transitioning to post-secondary training and careers. And that's an important component here. So it's not just part of this is the communication that you have among all of your stakeholders, your teachers, your tutors, the program manager, the really all the folks engaged in this. It's important to have good communication among them. It's also important to let students know about other opportunities. I had a great question in the Q&A about a student who's learning English, and they really are trying to focus on their career-based goals. That is a really good strategy. Whatever you can find in terms of reading materials that will connect them to a future career goal, and that's, again, allowing them to make sure that they're able to transition to post-secondary training careers. It's a very good strategy for increasing literacy quickly because they're motivated to read and learn about that. So we know that adult learners can face individual, institutional, and policy-related barriers to that transition to post-secondary. So again, whatever you can do to help inform students, and again, I've done a whole session on this before as well, to make sure that your teachers, your instructors know about what post-secondary offerings are out there, that you know what your students' career goals are, that you're able to discuss with them and set those goals with those students that align with their career goals. Maybe they already have a job that they're working in, but they want to make a career out of it. Helping them understand through communications what that transition would look like to that post-secondary. Well, you need this score to get into that program. Well, you need this qualification or this criteria to get into that program, or you need to know, or this is when you need to apply. All those pieces are really important for adult educators and helping facilitate their transition to post-secondary. And we know that's a goal of Florida as well, is to increase the number of students completing adult ed moving into post-secondary training. So that's one component of this. So we know also that it's important, as I'd mentioned already, for there to be communication and collaboration that helps ensure that ongoing implementation. So again, just having this process in place, if you have a self-study process like this in place, that's one way to ensure that communication's happening. If you bring together that team of teachers, your program director, your counselors, everyone together to talk about how you're doing in these areas, that's one way almost certain to boost communication. The other piece of this is having a plan that enables teachers, administrators, counselors, and others to collaborate regularly on student growth and program success and improvement. So, you really need to think about which students are doing well. Have former students come back when they're finished and talk about their successes. And we're actually working with the Department of Education to put out a survey for you all that you could share with students. It's like a progress monitoring survey. Do you have materials that help you? Do you have a schedule that works for you? So it's a series of questions that a program, and it's a template we're going to share with you all to go out to students to say, do you need other supports? Is what we provide to you working? And there are some questions that'll work best at intake. There are some questions that'll work best as students are going through the program. And there are some questions that'll work best at the end of the program or even right after students exit. So we're trying to develop some tools that would help with this piece as well. So what I'd like you to do is in the chat again, if you could just let us know, well, how does your communications plan work? Are you at a 4 there where it's perfect and you can't think of a way to improve? Are you at a 3 where we're doing okay here? We could be better, but it's not bad. Are you at a 2 where you really should think about ways to improve it? Or are you at a 1 where, yes, this is important, but we have bigger fish to fry? So go ahead in the chat and let us know how you're doing in terms of communications.
And one thing we found as well, and I think Kevin, you'll agree with this, that in a former survey that we sent out to programs was that when it came to exit surveys, there weren't a good many programs that administered or provided an exit survey. And so that's something that at least we got the sense that programs wanted to do better. And a lot of times, it is difficult if a student just stops coming sometimes to track them down. But providing that survey to students that for some reason discontinue, and then for students who also complete the program successfully, really gives you valuable information.
Thanks, Lori. That's a good point. And we're all over the place on this one. So I don't see, it's from very low to pretty high. So it's funny. This one, it really is program specific. So it sounds like some people have a really good plan for doing this. Some people feel like they have improvement that need to be made. Other people feel like they're doing well. We know that COVID, someone mentioned, thanks, Naomi, the challenges that we see in terms of this. We know things are working differently than they did. Joseph, I agree absolutely that ascertaining the student's individual goal is crucial. They need to know, they need to let you know why they're there. You need to ask them, why are you coming? What's your goal in this? That is what we found both in this work and in the work that we're doing on persistence and retention. That is one of the best things that you can do. There's more evidence behind that than almost any practice we've seen. Determining, talking to students and finding out what their goals are. Why are you coming and what do you want to get out of this? That is one of the most important things you can do. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. But yeah, I'm seeing so far, it looks like people are all over the place in terms of communication. So something to consider. If you're doing this well, that's great. If you're not, we're trying to share a couple of strategies and we'll do more of that at the end. But I just want to, we're trying to, I guess, prime the pump a little bit and have you think about what are some things that you might do as we're walking through this. Okay, and then we're going to move on and Lori is going to walk you through the last one.
Okay, and a heads up to our friends in corrections. So this is one, the instructional environment and processes. This is one where you may have to rate this particular area as a 1, which means that we know that's important, but it's not feasible for us to do much about it. So we know that particularly in your environment, there are definitely some constraints there. That said, for the rest of us, COVID has made things weird. So when we come to instructional environment and processes, what this looked like last February is not what they may look like now. And so we just have to keep that in mind and understand, that there has been some pivoting that has taken place very quickly and by necessity. And I would say give ourselves a little grace when it comes to this as well. So when we think about the instructional environment, we are thinking about certainly the physical environment of where instruction takes place. And that's important, right? So is it clean? Is it conducive to learning? Are there computers and other technology in the classroom that work. Those kinds of things, that's important. And I think it's important for a couple of reasons. One is, in order to make the classroom environment functional, then it needs to be all those things, clean and safe, and have technology and equipment that works. And then I think a second aspect of that is the fact that when those things are in place, that shows respect to your adult learners. And that's important. And it shows respect to our teachers as well, that they are they're doing their job in an environment that is conducive to learning and is conducive to what they are doing. So that physical aspect of the instructional environment is important. Also important is the emotional and social aspect of the environment, and the research talks about that as well. Is that environment learner-centered? So as Kevin shared, and as was mentioned in the chat, are we concentrating on the goals of our students? Are we revisiting those goals and making sure that we're reminded of them, and encouraging our students that we are taking steps towards those goals, and really honing in on what it is the students want to accomplish in the program? Are we building community? Not just between the teacher and the student, but also amongst the students. And we have research that shows that really important is the first 3 weeks of school, of the program. When someone first comes into the program, within 3 weeks, they need to form a relationship with the teacher and with somebody else in that class. So they know that they're welcome there, that that's a safe place to be, that people care about them. That's tremendously important. And then that differentiated teaching environment. So we know that you have a variety of students at a variety of different levels in your programs. You have English learners, you have adult learners that were unsuccessful in the K-12 world, you have prisoners, you have all kinds of different folks. And so that differentiation piece is really important. And I think that kind of goes back to training as well. We need to make sure that our teachers know how to do that. And so this aspect of an adult education program is really important. The environment and the processes that exist in order to make sure that our students are more likely to keep coming back and keep persisting even when they face obstacles. So here are the two parts of this particular area. And while I'm sharing a little bit about them, you can begin rating your programs. So is there a plan in place, or actually do facilities exist that are safe and healthy, that are conducive to learning? And I think it fits here, although it kind of bleeds over into other areas as well. I'll give you an example, and Kevin often shares this. We did a training, and I think it was like in Miami-Dade, and there was one teacher that shared with us that in his schedule, when he taught, they were in a building where, like, every 2 hours, every hour and a half, excuse me, he had to pick up all of his stuff and take his students to another room, because that room was going to be used for something else. And so he was wasting tons of time because they were having to transition in the middle of what he was doing. And so as a result of a conversation that took place while we were there with them, that was changed. And we actually had an opportunity to come back a while later, and they actually thanked us, because they were like, oh my gosh, this conversation took place and we went back and we changed it. And now this teacher doesn't have to move every hour and a half. And so it's just conversations like that that we hope will take place, that will then help teachers and students perhaps be in a little bit better environment, or to address the needs that you identify need to be addressed. So thinking about that healthy and safe environment, and then, excuse me, the other social aspect, the emotional and cultural needs of your adult learners. And so is that environment conducive to all those things? And now, again, we know, and many of you have noted, we've been working at home, everybody's online, not too much face-to-face. And that makes things more challenging, right? In order to build relationships, it's more difficult, but that means we have to try even harder. And I've heard some stories from K-12 teachers who are oftentimes doing the same thing, in that they have some face-to-face students, they have some online students, and oftentimes they're teaching them at the same time, which is incredibly challenging. I can't even imagine. But there are some that have tried to reach out to their online students and gather some information about them, and have behind them bulletin boards that are like student of the week, online student of the week, or some, again, trying to figure out how to make those connections with those students. And so we know that our instructional environment right now is a bit convoluted, but hopefully as we move into spring and into 2021, we'll be able to go back to some semblance of normalcy. But I know y'all have been trying very hard. And so I see, again, before COVID, about a 3. I see a 3.5. Again, some of you don't have control over this, so you're at a 1. And maybe that's where a lot of us are right now. We're at a 1, that we know this is important, but it's not feasible that we address it right now.
I just want to share. So I did a session with some folks in South Florida this morning, and one of the strategies they've mentioned to help with this was actually specifically setting up an individual time past in between orientation and the first course, intentionally scheduling some time for the instructor to have one-on-one conversation with the student in an online environment. And I thought that was a great idea. So there's a letter in multiple languages that's going from intake to the student, and then they're setting up a time for a one-on-one conversation between that's good whether it's face-to-face or online, but online in particular, because that's where they were, really spending some time so that the teacher got to know the student. And I really liked the way one of the managers said, they said that you want to, it's not just academics too, right? You want to ask them, I like the way she worded it. So you want to ask them a couple of personal questions, not intimate questions, but personal questions, about, their family or their dog or whatever. We're human beings. We're very social animals by nature. You need to get to know your students. And Lori's already mentioned that first 3 weeks of instruction is critical. And in an online environment, I think it's even more critical. So one thing, and I'm sharing my screen, so I can't do this. Lori, if you can find, I shared this with a group this morning, if you can find that REL Southeast infographic on social presence
Sure.
when teachers and students are apart, I think that they thought that was a really helpful resource. So if you don't mind looking that up and sharing it, I think that might be a helpful resource for them.
I'll do that.
That's awesome. Thanks. And I'm seeing some other stories in the chat. I'm going to look through real quickly. Thank you so much for sharing. So yeah, right. And I'm glad. So Sandy, you've got a library where some of your ESL classes meet and volunteers tutor. They're wonderful environments, but you haven't been able to meet there since March. I know that's a real issue right now. So you have some of them having class using Zoom, and you're training more volunteers to be able to do virtual tutoring. And I think that's a great idea. So whatever you can do within that to build in, those social and emotional connections is going to be helpful. And Naomi, I really appreciate your note too, that those transitions help make it more accessible. You're right. I mean, it has been helpful. I mean, I just mentioned for us too, like I met with some folks in South Florida and in Central Florida, and now I'm speaking with folks all over Florida, all on the same day. Normally, Lori and I would be traveling around the state doing this kind of thing. We can get to multiple places quickly without travel or fatigue, which is good. The connection's not the same, but at least it's there. So I agree with your point. So you're right. We need to consider ways to make sure that we're able to help our students in whatever way is best for them. And thanks, Lori, for finding and sharing that link so quickly. And Naomi, thanks. So you found that virtual learning's increased your incorporation of library and digital resources. Absolutely. So Kevin, that's a good question. As a volunteer, where do you find this training? And I mean, Lori and I will put our email addresses at the end of this. Feel free to reach out. We'll be glad to connect you and to help in any way that we can. That's something we do. Lori and I were teachers for a long time. That's our background. And we're always glad to help teachers in any way that we can. So that's the final of the 6. We'll take a few minutes to finish going over the guide, and then we want to leave a couple of minutes left for some Q&A time and discussion, especially on strategies that might help you all with the areas that you feel you need the most work in. So something else, I'll just really briefly mention this. For programs, we also incorporated an area that shows you possible sources of evidence. So for example, in the development and use of student data profiles, maybe you have a student progression plan or your program improvement plan or your documentation of assessments that, your GED scores, your TABE scores, your CASA scores, attendance, enrollment. So we just, again, in the possible sources of evidence for consideration, we just added some things for each area that you might want to look at as a group that might help you rate that. And again, you may know all these things anyway. You may not need to know or look at the evidence because many of you were able to rate without going through that process because you're living this day to day. But again, some people may need to look, or it doesn't hurt to look at your overall data as well, because sometimes you get so lost in the day to day, you forget about the larger trends. So again, it's a helpful section we put in the guide just to help you make considerations for that.
And this next form is just a means of facilitating conversation after all of the individual team members have rated individually, and you come back for that conversation and you compare your ratings and you decide as a team, which of these things are we going to focus on? And so when you come back, many of your team members may rate those areas similarly, but there may be those that would rate them quite differently. And that's where you need to have a conversation because perspectives are different, roles are different. And so you really need to think about that. And after this, after you basically reach a consensus as to where we're going to rate our program, then you really need to decide priority. What are those areas we're going to focus on? And if you end up where everything or almost everything is at a 2, just know that you can't possibly address all of those areas at the same time. So as a team, you need to think about a couple, 1 or 2 of them that you're really going to focus on, that we're really going to make efforts to improve in. Knowing that, and this is a good thing, that you're probably going to get some bleed over. So when you address one of them, it may very well kind of bleed into others. And so that's exciting. But you want to make sure that your focus remains on the area that you decided upon. Because if you try to spread yourself too thin, then nothing is going to get accomplished well. And so focus on those 1 or 2 areas. This helps you identify what those areas are, and then you can move forward with next steps.
Perfect. Thanks, Lori. And we have a next steps form. So after you finish going through that kind of consensus building, just determining which areas you want to focus on. And again, this is very unscientific. Reading through the chat responses, I would say, and again, you're all over the place because different groups had different ratings for things. I'd say, and Lori, see if you agree with me, from what I saw in the chat, area 1 is one to think about. So those student data profiles, it seemed like we had more on the lower end for that one. And again, it's the first one, so maybe people are harder on themselves then, I don't know. And then another area that looked like it might need some changes, the whole idea of teacher preparation and training. I saw a lot of 2s on those 2 in particular. Does that seem right?
Right, I would agree with you. I think those are, at least from a quick survey of the chat, those couple of areas that might be areas of focus.
Good. So if we were doing this with this group, and again, we'd want to talk about, and it's different because you're at different programs, right? And that may be the case if you're talking about more than one site, you may run into that too. Maybe one site's doing this perfectly and another site needs help in that area and vice versa. So I'd say area 1 to look at student data profiles potentially. And again, some people were rated really high there, so you wouldn't want to do that. But others, again, it seemed like we had a lot in the 2 to 2.5 on that one. So you'd list maybe student data profiles first. Our second one we might want to look at is that whole idea of teacher preparation and training. So we'd list that for 2. Then for priority area 1, we kind of listed out some steps. So what are next steps you'd want to do? And we'll talk about those in a minute. But again, student data profiles, making sure that the data gets from intake to the teacher, that there's a good process in place, that there's a way to track student data over time, that you're sharing student growth and that you celebrate student growth even as they're moving through the program, that you're setting student goals for making growth and tying that to post-secondary opportunities potentially. And then for number 4, teacher preparation and training. Some of that is just knowing, having a good process of hiring. I really like the discussion we had about retention, making sure that you've got a family-like environment that wants people to stick around, because that's another thing that research found. The longer teachers were there, the higher their outcomes were, because you get better at your job over time, right? And that's why retention's part of that. And then just making sure that teachers are aware of training opportunities and that they have leave time to actually attend professional development opportunities. So those are some things, again, that we could talk about and focus on. Then you'd want to list out the next steps. What are the challenges to this? And then come out with a plan and outline that and say, who's responsible for doing this, or who even has authority to do this? So those are some questions that you need to work out. So that's kind of what we do on the planning next steps form. And the next piece we have is an action plan template. So once you've come up with your steps from your planning next steps form, you'd actually, really try to step that out on an action step plan template. Who's responsible? What's the timeline, day, month, and year? What resources are available? What's needed? What are your barriers? The whole communication plan for that. What's the evaluation? How are we going to make sure this worked or didn't? We're making a change. How are we going to check and make sure it actually worked? And then a budget for that. How much do we have allocated? How much can we spend to do this? So those are all pieces that we put in the action plan template.
Sorry, I had to unmute. And so finally, Appendix A. This is an appendix at the end of the guide that we included that just provides a summary of the research that we have used to base the guide on. And so knowing that your time is very valuable and that you probably don't want to spend any extra time you might have reading through studies word for word and pages, what we have done is we've actually included the studies here, and we've included a summary, some quotes, just a synopsis of that research as it pertains to the particular area in which we've included it. So the reference is there. So if you really want to go through and look at some of these studies, and they are very interesting, absolutely. And so we'd encourage you, there's a couple of really comprehensive ones there that you saw on some of the slides this afternoon. By all means, please, go there, check them out yourself. But we did want to, as a convenience, provide information that pertained to them here for you. And then you see on the left side of your screen just an infographic just depicting visually the various areas that are contained in the guide and the importance of them as they relate to adult education. So that's available as well, just as a quick visual depiction of the guide. And so that's an overview of the guide, and we've had discussion along the way. So thank you for that. And there's our email addresses. If we can help you in any way at all, please feel free to reach out to either one of us. We pride ourselves on responding quickly. And so please rest assured that we will definitely get back to you if you have questions that we can help you with later.
And we do have a stakeholder feedback survey that we would ask you to complete. And Lori, since I'm sharing my screen, do you have that link that you could put in the chat?
Got it.
Awesome, thank you. Wonderful. So Lori just put that link in the chat. And Sammy, I see your comment: as a vocational teacher, COVID-19 made my job less stressful. That certainly is possible. Yeah, it's changed all of our lives in various ways. So what we'd like to do, so again, the link to the survey is there. We have a couple of minutes. If you have questions or you want any specific tips, again, feel free to reach out. We do all kinds of different trainings and are glad to talk to you or provide resources if we can. Feel free to email us if that's an easier way for you to do that. We're glad to reach out. And again, that's how this session happens. We get people who reach out by email and ask us to replicate or ask us to work specifically with a group. So feel free to email us any questions you have too. Right, and while you're considering questions, Lori and I could talk about a few other things we've seen. So In terms of specific literacy strategies as well with students, I'd really like, we had a Q&A around helping a student who's interested in, a post-secondary training field. Anything you can do to connect students with, again, their career goals or their career interests, and finding text, having people come from programs to talk to your classes about, certification programs, areas of need in your community where workers are needed. That certainly can be advantageous for your students. And then, Lori tells a job frequently about one of the biggest motivational pieces she's seen for reading for high school students is the driver's ed manual, right? Making sure that students can pass that test. So it's the same thing with careers. Anything you can get that's incredibly relevant and will impact their life right away is excellent reading material to share with them.
And certainly, and you know this, just celebrating successes along the way, no matter how small they might seem, that we as adults, particularly, we need to see progress. And especially if our goal seems a little bit far flung, then it's really important that we see that we're taking those steps, that we are making progress towards those goals. So ensuring that you have the data available to you that can reveal the fact that students are making progress is really helpful.
That's a great point, because most of these students have incredibly busy lives. They're working, they have families. In order for them to prioritize the time to share with you, they need to show that what they're receiving is beneficial and that they're having some progress. That's a great point to make, Lori. So with that, we are right at about 2:13. So we're right at the end of our session. Again, we want to thank the Florida Literacy Coalition for sponsoring this, and the Florida Department of Education. And before we move on, I see we had one question: how do you help students when they do not vocalize their needs? And that is a great question. That came up in the South Florida session I had this morning too. And some of the instructors there are requiring their students to text them, and they have surveys that they send out through text to students to try to have them respond, because that, honestly, they said they get more connections with students, in some cases, not all, through texting them questions than they do through vocalization, which that may be a whole different, separate, really statement about our society in general or about communication methods in 2020. But they did say that they found a lot of information out through students by texting in a way that they wouldn't vocalize. So that may be, again, if that's something you're comfortable with, that may be a way to go. Good, thanks, Joseph. So you saw students from all levels and you attempt to tailor the classes to the different levels that might be needed. That is a great, again, approach, and is needed, especially with ESL. Yeah, getting them to speak up. Absolutely. Yes, Suzanne, texting can get rid of that embarrassment. You're absolutely right. Good, thanks, Alonga. That was a strategy that was shared this morning that they really felt strongly about. Good, well, we're right at 2:15. Thank you all so much. Again, if you get a chance and can complete that survey, we appreciate it. And Nicole, again, thanks for moderating. We really appreciate all of you and the hard work that you're doing. Our email addresses are there. Reach out anytime. We're always glad to hear from you. And we can't thank you enough for all that you're doing for your students and their families. It's so important, the work that you do.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us, Lori and Kevin. So I will actually be sending a follow-up email to everyone. It will include the presentation, and I'll also resend that survey for those of you, if anybody didn't get a chance to take it. And thank you all for joining us again.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, and have a great weekend.
You as well.
Bye-bye.